Hello and welcome to the Sci-Fi Christian. I am Bandy Bono, here for the last of our Lenten Dante reflections. Of course, not the end of Dante himself, or the Divine Comedy itself, I should say. We still have the rest of Purgatory and Paradise to go through. But this is the end of the Lenten section of this discovery. You know, at the end of our reading today, where you should be through Canto 27, by the way, by next week, which would be Sunday, April 12th. I'll talk about that more in just a little bit. We are supposed to be through the end of Purgatorio, so those last 6 cantos. But if you made it through Canto 27, by the time you're watching this video, then you know that we have, or Dante and Virgil have anyway, and we vicariously through reading of their adventures have reached the terrestrial paradise. They have reached Eden. They have passed through the fires quite literally, and are now, Dante is now cleansed of his sin. He is prepared to begin enjoying and entering into what God has for the blessed in paradise. A number of things to talk about this week. First, let me start as usual, just a brief summary of what we covered. So last time we went up the first 4 of the terraces in Purgatory. Here we round out the last 3, which are, in ascending order, avarice, greed, gluttony, and lust. And yes, for those of you keeping score at home, those correspond in reverse order to the first 3 circles, I should say. Well, first 3 not counting limbo of the circles of Inferno, which were lust, then gluttony, and then the hoarders and the wasters, right, which corresponds to the sin of avarice or greed. So in the circle of avarice, or the terrace of avarice, I should say, you have all of the greedy people in life being cleansed from their sin by being forced face down into the dust. In the terrace number 6 of gluttony, they are starved to death in a rather horrible, emaciated fashion. Not to death, I should say, but they're, rather than being allowed to indulge in whatever they want, they're walking around like skeletons. And Dante has that moment where he says, if you looked at their face and you wanted to read OMO, you would see it very easily, which is, if you didn't read the note on that, that was probably a somewhat confusing line. Essentially what Dante is, he's doing a couple things. First, O, M, the nose, and then O is a way that you could look at somebody's face, so he's going off of physical features, but then OMO or UMO or something like that is, and I don't know my Italian, but I'm going off of the notes I've read, is, one way that you could write the word man. So again, just like we kind of saw in the terrace with the prideful, he's playing off this idea of mankind being forced to confront itself and its fallenness as it's raised to what it ought to be in its blessedness. And then finally in the lustful, we have the fires that kind of, keep them at the edge of the terrace and singe them, and then eventually have to walk through that. Along the way, we pick up this fun little traveling companion, Statius, who gets to move up a terrace. There's a great earthquake and everything. Yay! It's as he gets to move up from the circle of, or the terrace, of avarice up to the terrace of gluttony. Statius is a historical poet, though how much historicity there is in Dante's account of him is very difficult to say. I did a little bit of research on this and couldn't really find anything that would confirm what Dante says. So Statius is the guy who says, hey, I'm a big fan of Virgil and everything. I love that guy. In fact, that guy's writings helped me to lead me to Christ and all that. And then Dante's like, well, I can't keep the secret, even though Virgil kind of wants me to. This guy who's leading me on is Virgil. And they just, as my friend Alan put it, have they in his Goodreads comment on this section where he and I had a little conversation. He said they have a nice little mutual admiration society going on here, which I think is well put. And so Statius kind of hangs around there through a good chunk of this section. Statius was, as I said, a real historical individual. And however, he was a poet and everything. He did live in the first century AD. As far as I know, though, like I said, there's no evidence to suggest that he did convert to Christianity, though I don't think that's really the point Dante is trying to make. He's not trying to establish historical fact here so much as he is trying to, once again, promote his guy Virgil. That's where the real mutual admiration society is. I mean, Dante just has this huge man crush on Virgil. He just loves this guy. So there's this conflict, though, of course. It's been running through the entire poem to this point of that Virgil is a pagan, and so what do we do with this? And Dante never quite lets Virgil out of hell. His theology doesn't let him do that. But he does everything else but that. He wants us to say that, hey, Virgil's leading people to Christ, or Christ is drawing people to himself through Virgil, or however Dante would have phrased that. And we have, repeated references from the very beginning where Virgil talks about St. Lucia and Beatrice and Mary recruiting him that, we'll be praying for you, we're going to tell God all the good stuff about you. So Dante doesn't ever quite get Virgil out of hell, but I think that he's very close to doing that, in this section here of Statius is good evidence for maybe promoting the idea that Dante is truly I don't know if I want to go so far as to say that he sees hope for people like Virgil who never heard of Christ, but I think that he would say that if there is hope for them, Virgil's going to be first in line on the train out of limbo. Okay. So, again, not a super complex summary in terms of plot. I think it's worth noting, too, by the way, that we have finally reached Beatrice, or she'll be popping up in the next few cantos, but we get a reference to her as Dante passes through the wall of flame. So what's going to happen in the next few cantos is we'll have the transition from Virgil to Beatrice. Virgil, of course, representative of human reason, and human reason has now gone as far as it is possible to go, and now we are going to be guided by grace and revelation as represented in the character of Beatrice. So I kind of mixed in a few different symbol talks in there as well with the summary. I do think it's worth maybe saying just a little bit more about the parallels of this section and the Inferno. It's very much intentional that Dante wants us to see this section as climbing out of hell. Of course, there isn't a one-to-one comparison between the 7 terraces of Purgatory and the 9 circles of hell, but yet as we get to the top of Mount Purgatory, it gets very, very close. The parallels, even in the geography of the two places, are really unmissable, from the fact that hell gets narrow, narrow, narrow as you go down. Purgatory gets narrow, narrow, narrow as you go up. Dante and Virgil, and I don't know how much you would make of this, or commentators make of this, or how much we can read into it, but I do think it's interesting to note that in the Inferno they almost always go to the left as they're going down. In Purgatory they almost always go to the right. Again, I don't feel qualified to sit here and tell you what that symbol means, but Dante is a genius, so I have to believe that there's some intentionality behind that, and I'm sure that someone somewhere has commentated on that. What I wanted to maybe talk about then for our Lenten reflection, or really our final Lenten reflections, we'll move into Easter reflections, which, by the way, that's why the videos will now be, and I know I've said this before, but just to reiterate this, from now on the videos will be released on Sundays instead of Fridays, because we move out of a season liturgically of penance, where Friday is the day in the Church of Penance, to a season of rejoicing, and Sunday is the day in the Church of Rejoicing. So the rest of Purgatorio will cover that on Sunday, April 12th. A little bit of time to catch up there if you're a bit behind. But anyway, where I wanted to kind of go with this final Lenten reflection is to maybe spend a little bit of time on what I think is a very interesting section in Canto 27, where Dante is at the very top of Purgatory now. He's ready to pass out of the circle of lust. Um, and I want to read to you here from Anthony Eslin's translations. I like the way he puts it a lot, where, you've got this wall of flame that Dante has to pass through if he's going to make it to Beatrice, and it's not a trick, these are real flames. I think the text supports that very much. They're going to hurt, and yet he has to willingly make that final choice to step forward through them, or else everything he's done to this point is going to be in vain. And Eslin translates Virgil's words to him like this. This is Virgil speaking. My son, there may indeed be torment here, speaking of the wall of flame, but death can never be. Just remember when we rode on Gerion's back, that was back down in Inferno when they, took the monster guy down from Circle 7 to Circle 8. I led you safely down. What will I do now that we're nearer to God? Stand in this fire's belly 1,000 years. You must believe it for a certainty. You wouldn't be balder by a single hair. If you think what I tell you is a lie, come closer, test it for yourself. Come here, put your hands to your tunic's hem and try. Now set aside all your fear, turn round this way, be confident, come in. It's really an incredible moment. I find this whole canto very, very moving. He goes, so skipping down a little bit. Into the flames he went ahead of me, asking that Statius come along and back, who'd walked between us on the narrow way. The blazes there inside did so suppress all measure that to feel the cool again I'd have flung myself into boiling glass. One last horrific image from Dante before we move on to paradise. But my sweet father spoke of Beatrice with every step he took to comfort me. I think I can already see her eyes. And we were guided by a singing voice from past the flames, and turning toward the sound, we came out where you climbed to reach the peak. O blessed of my father come, resounded from within a dazzling gleam, too mighty for my eyes to look upon. Just, it's such an incredible section, and I could go on and read that whole thing. I just find that canto very, very deeply moving on a number of levels. For one, it's a tonal transition into Paradiso. This sense of joy and rapture and being caught up in something greater than yourself and greater than you can comprehend. And there's a sense of that there, even as we're still in punishment. But I think if we're talking more about Lenten reflection, what strikes me there is that we have to be willing, if we're going to truly be transformed by God's sanctification in this life, whether it's in Lent or any other time, we have to be willing to accept God's punishment. But God's punishment is such a beautiful picture of what that looks like, because it's not cruel, it's not harsh, it's painful. That image of I'd rather, to cool down, I'd throw myself on boiling glass. It's incredibly painful. But yet, the point isn't the pain. The pain is there to strip something away from us. And I love what Virgil says there. I think I can almost see her eyes. Just such an incredible image of, in the midst of punishment, keeping our focus on where God would take us. I think that, I think of our culture, I think of our world, and our faith, and how confusing the topic of grace becomes. And how we always, we try and we fail. All of us fail. I fail at trying to strike this balance myself and dealing with others between grace and punishment and truth and judgment. We have sin, but then we have God's love, and we have all these things that just get really confusing when we start talking about things like, well, what does it mean to turn from your sin? What does it mean to deal with people who are in sin? What does it mean to deal with my sin? And at the same time be loving? And It goes back to what we talked about at the end of Inferno, with the whole concept of loving the sin or hate the sin, and how the message of Christianity, though, is to violently divide us from our sin. And here we have that being worked out in a very powerful way. And that's a concept that's so hard to apply in a way that's consistent with the truth and consistent with love when we're dealing with the world around us, and we're dealing with ourselves, and we're dealing with others. And part of the power, I think, of great literature in particular, and Dante in this moment in general, is the ability to cut through that confusion and just show us what that looks like. And not to say that that automatically becomes easy then to translate what he's saying there into the real world. But man, if we could capture that image of willingly submitting ourselves to the flames so that our sin gets burned away, while simultaneously feeling God's love and his guidance and keeping our eyes on what he has for us, we'd never have another debate about what it means to love the sinner and hate the sin again, because we'd be living it in the most profound and real way. And we're going to get a lot of moments like that in Paradiso, where they almost defy explanation, but just draw us into this kind of contemplation, where they move us at a very deep level to reach for something that perhaps exceeds our grasp in this life. And I think that this is one of them. I think that this is one of those moments where we are going to struggle to live that out, myself and others, and just in the way that we deal with the confusing and tough issues in this world. But yet Dante, I think, there captures an idea, he captures an image that we need to strive for as Christians. And really, at the end of the day, the whole point of something like Lent, the whole point of penance, the whole point of sanctification is that image of walking through the flames, accepting the pain, but also accepting the trust, the brutal, absolutely brutal, horrible trust to walk into those flames and trust that God is bringing us out on the other side. Extraordinarily powerful image. And if I'm not putting it clearly, I apologize. Again, that might be a problem as we enter into Paradiso, where we're confronted with things that just begin to defy words. And at times the greatness of Dante just has to stand on its own. But in any event, I hope that as we come to the end of this Lenten season, that these videos have been helpful to your journey in sanctification in Lent, or whenever you happen to be watching them. Guiding you through this process has been wonderful to me, and I'm looking forward to continuing it in the Easter season. So, for those of you doing the read-along, through Canto 33, the end of Purgatorio, by Sunday, April 12th, that's the next stop here on our journey. And if you're a little bit behind, don't sweat it. This is a great time to get caught up, and the readings are the length of the readings is going to lessen up from this point on. We'll spend more time in contemplation of the different parts of Paradiso until we get to the end of the Easter season in May. So that's all I have for us today then. I hope you're enjoying it, and I will talk to you later. Thank you, from the Sci-Fi Christian.